Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is your guy Keenan Lambert, and in this video I am talking to you from La Habana. So right now many of you already know that the United States has attacked Venezuela and removed, kidnapped its president, its dictator, Nicolás Maduro.
Is Cuba next? In addition to the illustrious embargo, the United States is waging economic war against Cuba. Cuba's main exports, cigars and rum, cannot be imported to the United States, even by visitors. They ban American visitors from staying in state-owned hotels and pressured Airbnb to remove Cuban hosts with Cuban bank accounts.
Now, after what appears to be a clear kidnapping, the United States still left his second-in-command, Delcy Rodriguez. Okay, right now she is the president or acting president of the nation. Now, the United States over the years has been very critical of his administration. Okay, Nicolás Maduro is certainly guilty of abusing his citizens. Okay, several people have been disappeared. Okay, elections have been stolen, similar to what Donald Trump tried to do back on January 6th, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. But anyway, despite the charges of drug smuggling, what the discourse has been around has actually been around Venezuela's oil and oil rights. Years ago, Venezuela decided to nationalize their oil. Therefore, except for special contracts, the government would be harvesting and refining its own oil. So Donald Trump, our president, kept on saying, and Stephen Miller kept on saying, Venezuela has stolen our oil and we have to get it back. Okay, this is oil that is on Venezuelan land, something that the United States only has some jurisdiction over because United States corporations were working there at one point, right? So that's the only argument that you can make, but really it makes no sense. The oil exists on Venezuelan land, therefore it is Venezuelan oil. Okay. Now, despite removing Maduro, right now there doesn't seem to be any actual deal in place, despite what the Trump administration is saying, that the president of Venezuela has agreed to engage in some sort of deal. In actuality, it doesn't seem so, because the United States still continues to harass oil tankers that are leaving Venezuela and that are coming in. So the United States are still harassing these oil deliveries despite them already removing the president and claiming to have had a deal. Ultimately, the goal of the United States is to force the president of Venezuela to the negotiating table. That way the United States can essentially dictate terms to her or threaten her with the same fate as Nicolás Maduro. Now, some of you may be asking, okay, Keenan, well, get to the point about how this connects back to Cuba. Well, you see, the Cuban economy actually thrives off of Venezuelan oil. Without Venezuelan oil, the Cuban economy will collapse. Power that exists there comes from power plants that use crude oil in the process of creating electricity. So without crude oil, without Venezuelan crude oil, then Cuba doesn't have the ability to power itself. And if Cuba doesn't have the ability to power itself, then it's a budding capitalist system or fledgling capitalist system, really, right? It's going to all go down the drain very quickly. Now, some of you may be saying, okay, if they can't get it from Venezuela, they can get it from somewhere else. Yes, absolutely, but given their ideological alignment, what Venezuela has done over the years since Chavez for Cuba has provided subsidized crude oil, which would allow them to go ahead and have cheap transportation, for them to have cheap energy, right? For them to be able to keep their proteins refrigerated. Okay, Cuba is a place that has issue with foodstuffs. Okay, so perishable goods are very much at risk here. Okay, it's not like back in the olden days where things were salted and carried around for months. No. We're in the modern day now, and refrigeration is everything. Even in the modern day, Cuba still struggles with proper refrigeration. And when you're dealing with proteins, it's mandatory. So already in Cuba's provinces, you see that there is electrical rationing. In some cases, there are blackouts that last majority of the day. So people are milling about, they're handling their own business, right? But they're doing it without electricity. Okay? And for that reason, you have many individuals who are coming from outside of the city into La Habana to seek opportunities, simply because living out in the provinces is uncomfortable and it doesn't lead you to that much money. Now, as I've said in other videos, what has happened here in Havana is that Habaneros, okay, they are generally the ones with the connections to access the lead, right? And then people come in from the provinces and take their places, take their spaces here in Havana. They work here for a few years, they gain the connections that they need, or maybe they earn the money that they need to earn, and then they leave. You know, there seems to be this prevailing idea amongst Miami Cubans, South Florida Cubans, that if you make Cuba super duper uncomfortable, then it will fall. Okay, but what does falling look like? What you need to have, you know, some sort of revolution is you need people willing to fight that. Okay, what Cubans do is they revolt with their feet. They revolt with their passports. Instead of marching through the streets, instead of demanding what they believe is justice, they move to another country. Okay, their idea is, okay, why fight? Despite there being widespread dissent here in Cuba, there doesn't seem to be a desire for Cuba to be taken over by a foreign nation. Okay, Cubans here are proud of their nation, they're proud of their history, and they want better for their nation. If they can't have better for the nation here, then they move abroad. Okay, what Miami Cubans seem to forget is who they were previously. Okay, if 1 or 2 generations ago, they were living here, they were proud Cubans. And now they've gone abroad, they've collectivized, and they seem to have, again, as I said, forgotten where they came from. So right now, effectively, the socialist system here in Cuba is dead. Okay, the way how it exists, or the way that it supports the population the most, is subsidized public transportation. It is public health, for sure, and then education. Okay, after that, what is there? Right? You can say that the Cubans right now are having a rough go of it when it comes to them participating in this early form of capitalism. Cuba has only been capitalist for maybe 25 years, 30 years, and it's a marriage that was forced. Before the special period, right, where the Soviet Union fell, the Soviet Union essentially held Cuba as its child and incorporated it into its block of nations. Okay, that way Cuba was able to trade for all the things that it needed on the, well, not global market, but on the Russian bloc market. The Soviet aligned bloc, if you will. Far beyond some power rationing, Cubans have had instances where they've gone days without power. And still in those cases, it didn't cause the nation to self-destruct. Right now, the nation is leaning on capitalism as its main contributor, as its exports, right, seem to have fallen by the wayside. Sugar, tobacco, rum, etc. Those things have dipped over the years. So Cuba has been resilient and has relied on itself for the most part. With this Venezuelan thing, it was a huge boon to their fledgling economy, okay, budding economy. You can look at it that way as well, budding. However, it's not everything. What you find here in Cuba is that in many cases, especially out in the provinces, they're switching over to solar. Okay, they're making those investments in cheap solar panels, and they're using that to fuel the nation, to fuel small towns. And given the insecurity as it relates to the oil procurement process. Right? You can expect that Cuba is going to realign itself, to move itself in that direction. Okay, Cubans always find a way to resolve it. Okay, so for you Miami Cubans, for you South Florida Cubans who forgot who you used to be, okay, just look at your island and look how they continue to live. They continue to try to prosper. Okay, so you have the decision to make where you can either help them in that process or you can continue being their mortal enemy. My name is Keenan Lambert. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.